The teacher called me and said that she'll punish my son for faking seizures. Mrs. Susan called me during work last Monday. Your son is pretending to have seizures. He's disrupting the class with his attention-seeking behavior. I need you to pick him up immediately. I left a client meeting, drove 40 minutes to Lincoln Elementary, found my 8-year-old son Caleb sitting in the nurse's office, confused and exhausted. The nurse looked worried. He had an episode, lasted about 2 minutes. He's been out of it since. That sounds like a real seizure. Mrs. Susan says he's faking. I've been a nurse for 15 years. That wasn't fake. But I'm not a doctor. Tuesday morning, I kept Caleb home, took him to his pediatrician. She ran basic tests, referred us to a neurologist. First available appointment was 3 weeks away. I called the school, explained the situation, asked them to watch Caleb carefully. On Wednesday, Caleb went back to school. Mrs. Susan called again at noon. He did it again. The fake shaking. I told him to stop. He wouldn't. So I put him in the hallway until he was done. You put my son in the hallway during a medical episode? It wasn't medical. He was perfectly fine after. Even smiled at his friends through the window. Classic attention-seeking. That's called post-seizure confusion. Sometimes people seem happy. They're not fully conscious. Don't make excuses for him. I've taught for 20 years. I know fake seizures when I see them. Thursday, no call. I thought things were better. Then Caleb came home with a note. He'd had another episode. Mrs. Susan made him sit in the corner facing the wall for the rest of the day. For faking. Friday, I went to the principal. Mr. Jeffries barely looked up from his computer. Mrs. Susan is our most experienced teacher. If she says he's pretending, he probably is. My son needs medical attention during these episodes, not punishment. Have you considered that maybe he needs discipline instead of attention? Kids these days will do anything to get out of work. I left furious. The next Monday, Caleb had a seizure at lunch. The cafeteria monitor called 911. Paramedics came. Mrs. Susan told them it was fake. Don't waste your time. He does this for attention. His mother encourages it. The paramedic ignored her, checked Caleb's vitals, recommended immediate neurological evaluation. This child is showing clear signs of temporal lobe seizures. Tuesday, I pulled Caleb from school, told them he was sick. Really, I was scared. What if he had a serious seizure and Mrs. Susan just left him there? Wednesday, I researched. Found out Mrs. Susan had a history. 3 other parents had complained about her dismissing medical issues. 1 kid with asthma, another with diabetes, a girl with severe allergies, all dismissed as attention-seeking, all forced to sit out activities as punishment for their conditions. Thursday, the neurologist appointment got moved up. Another family canceled. The doctor did an EEG, found abnormal brain activity, classic temporal lobe epilepsy. Probably had it for months, maybe years, getting worse because it's untreated. I asked for everything in writing. Official diagnosis, treatment plan, the works. Friday, I didn't send Caleb to school. Instead, I went to see the superintendent. Dr. Cross wasn't interested at first. Then I showed her the neurologist's report. This says untreated seizures can cause permanent brain damage. Yes. And Mrs. Susan has been punishing him for having them, making him sit in corners, putting him in hallways, telling paramedics not to treat him. Dr. Cross went pale. She called the district lawyer. He read the report, read my documentation of every incident, every call, every note sent home. This is a massive liability issue. Your son was denied medical care by a teacher who decided she knew better than paramedics. We could lose our license, our insurance, everything. Monday, there was a substitute in Mrs. Hobbs's class. She'd been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Tuesday, 3 more families came forward. Kids with ADHD called lazy, a boy with dyslexia called stupid, a girl with anxiety told to stop being dramatic. All documented, all ignored by Principal Jeffries. Wednesday, the district held an emergency school board meeting. The school board meeting room filled up fast. Parents squeezed into rows of metal folding chairs. Teachers stood along the back wall. Community members lined up at the door when the seats ran out. I sat in the front row with my documentation folder pressed against my chest. My hands left sweat marks on the manila cover. Dr. Cross sat at the head table with 5 board members. She kept glancing at the door like she expected someone to walk in. Her face looked pale under the fluorescent lights. I noticed Mrs. Susan wasn't there. Her usual seat at these meetings stayed empty. The board president was a tall man with gray hair. He cleared his throat and tapped the microphone. The feedback made everyone wince. He shuffled his papers and looked out at the crowd. We've received serious complaints about medical care denial at Lincoln Elementary. Multiple families have come forward with similar concerns. This is not a situation we take lightly. 3 other parents sat in the front row with me. I recognized them from the school pickup line, but I'd never spoken to them before. They all held folders like mine. The board members exchanged looks across the table. One woman leaned over and whispered to the man next to her. Another board member frowned and wrote something on his notepad. The president called my name first. I stood up and my legs felt wobbly. The walk to the microphone seemed to take forever, even though it was only 10 feet. My hands shook when I gripped the sides of the podium, but my voice came out steady. Mrs. Susan punished my 8-year-old son for having seizures. She thought he was faking. She put him in the hallway during medical episodes, made him sit in corners, told paramedics not to treat him when they responded to a 911 call. The room went completely quiet. I could hear the air conditioning hum. Someone in the back coughed. I opened my folder and pulled out the neurologist's report. The paper crinkled in my hands. This is the diagnosis. Caleb has temporal lobe epilepsy. He's had it for months, maybe longer. It went untreated because a teacher decided she knew better than medical professionals. I held up the report so everyone could see the letterhead. The board members leaned forward in their seats. One woman put on her reading glasses. Untreated seizures can cause permanent brain damage. My son was at risk every single day he sat in that classroom. Every time he had an episode and got punished instead of helped. I walked the report to the board president. He took it and started reading. His eyebrows went up. He passed it to the woman next to him. She read it and her mouth formed a thin line. The report made its way down the table. Each board member looked more concerned than the last. I went back to my seat. My legs still felt shaky, but I'd said what I needed to say. The board president called the next parent. Freya Ogden stood up. She was a short woman with curly red hair. She walked to the microphone with a blue folder. My son has ADHD, diagnosed by his pediatrician, documented with the school. Mrs. Susan called him lazy. She made him miss recess as punishment because he couldn't sit still. Her voice got louder as she talked. ADHD is a neurological condition. It requires accommodations, not discipline. She opened her folder and pulled out medical records. The pediatrician's notes explained everything: brain chemistry, medication options, recommended classroom strategies. Mrs. Susan ignored all of it. She decided my son just needed to try harder. Freya's hands trembled when she set the papers on the board president's table. He picked them up and started reading. 2 other board members looked over his shoulder. Mateo Callahan went next. He was a big man with a thick beard. His voice cracked when he started talking. My daughter has dyslexia. She's 9 years old. Mrs. Susan told her she was stupid, said she needed to try harder, made her read out loud in class even though she couldn't. He stopped and wiped his eyes. My daughter developed severe anxiety. She started refusing to go to the school. She cried every morning, said the teacher made her feel worthless. His voice broke completely. He pulled out a stack of papers from his folder. Psychological evaluations, reading specialist reports, a letter from a therapist. All of it documented his daughter's condition and the damage Mrs. Susan's treatment caused. The board members passed the papers around. One man shook his head slowly. A woman covered her mouth with her hand. Kathy Waters spoke last. She was younger than the other parents, maybe in her late 20s. Her daughter has diagnosed anxiety disorder, panic attacks. The whole thing is documented with her doctor. Mrs. Susan told her to stop being dramatic. Kathy's voice got sharp. When my daughter had a panic attack in class, Mrs. Susan wouldn't let her go to the nurse, made her sit there hyperventilating. She sat there until she threw up from stress. The room erupted in whispers. Parents turned to each other. Teachers in the back shifted uncomfortably. The board president banged his gavel. The noise died down. He looked at Dr. Cross. Why weren't these complaints addressed earlier? Dr. Cross's face went red. She straightened her papers. Principal Jeffries handled them at the building level. He assured me they were just parent-teacher disagreements, not serious medical issues. Her voice got quieter. I trusted his judgment. The board president's jaw tightened. Kirk Bailey stood up from his seat at the side table. He was the district lawyer, tall and thin with wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a thick binder to the front. The district violated federal disability laws. Students with documented medical conditions were denied appropriate accommodations. He opened the binder and showed charts, color-coded pages, highlighted sections. The liability exposure is enormous. We could lose federal funding. The state could revoke our license. Our insurance won't cover willful violations. One board member raised her hand. Did anyone report these issues before tonight? I stood up again. I went to Mr. Jeffries first. He dismissed my concerns, said Mrs. Susan was too experienced to be wrong about a child faking seizures. The board member wrote something down. Other board members looked at each other with worried faces. The meeting was just getting started. A woman in the back row stood up. She had gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She wore a business suit. Her hands shook when she gripped the chair in front of her. My daughter had severe allergies, life-threatening. The school nurse kept an EpiPen in her office. Mrs. Susan refused to keep one in the classroom. She said my daughter was exaggerating, said she wanted special treatment. The woman's voice got louder. My daughter had an allergic reaction during art class. Mrs. Susan wouldn't let her go to the nurse. said she could wait until the end of class. Another teacher walked by and saw her face swelling. That teacher ran to get the EpiPen, saved her life. The board president leaned forward. When did this happen? 2 years ago. I filed a complaint with Principal Jeffries. He said Mrs. Susan was just being cautious about letting kids leave class. Said my daughter probably wasn't that allergic. The woman wiped her eyes. I pulled my daughter out of Lincoln Elementary the next week. Couldn't risk her life again. Several board members shifted in their seats. One woman covered her mouth with her hand. Another man shook his head slowly. Dr. Cross's face went pale. She kept glancing at Kirk Bailey. He was writing notes on a yellow legal pad. His pen moved fast across the paper. He filled one page and flipped to the next. The board president looked at the other board members. They looked back at him with worried faces. How many complaints did we miss? How many years has this been happening? A board member with glasses raised his hand. The president nodded at him. What happened when the paramedics came for your son? He looked at me. I stood up again. My legs felt weak, but I made myself talk. Mrs. Susan told them Caleb was faking. She said not to waste their time. Said I encouraged his attention-seeking behavior. The paramedic didn't listen to her. He checked Caleb's vital signs, looked at his eyes, watched how he was acting. He told Mrs. Susan that Caleb showed clear signs of temporal lobe seizures, recommended immediate medical evaluation. Mrs. Susan argued with him, said she'd taught for 20 years and knew fake seizures when she saw them. The board members looked at each other. The woman who'd covered her mouth earlier was now writing notes. Kirk Bailey stopped writing and stood up. He walked to the front table where the board sat. May I add something? The board president nodded. Kirk Bailey held up his legal pad. Telling emergency responders not to treat a child during a medical episode could be charged as child endangerment. If that child had been seriously harmed while the teacher prevented treatment, we'd be looking at criminal charges, not just civil liability. The room went completely silent. Parents stopped whispering. Teachers in the back stopped shifting in their seats. Even the board members sat perfectly still. Kirk Bailey continued. The district's insurance won't cover willful denial of medical care. We're exposed to lawsuits from every family affected. The state could revoke our license to operate. Federal disability law violations could cost us millions in funding. He set his legal pad down. This isn't just about one teacher. It's about systematic failure at every level of administration. The board president banged his gavel even though the room was already quiet. We need a recess. 15 minutes. The board members stood up. They huddled together at the side of the room. Dr. Cross joined them. Kirk Bailey showed them papers from his folder. They talked in urgent whispers. Freya walked over to me. She put her hand on my shoulder. Thank you for doing this. I couldn't. I just pulled my son out and gave up. You didn't give up? You protected your child. That's what mattered. Mateo came over too. His eyes were red. My daughter still has nightmares about that classroom. Maybe this will help her heal. Knowing someone finally listened. Kathy joined us. She was crying. Other parents came over. A man shook my hand. A woman hugged me. Several people were wiping their eyes. I felt my own tears starting, but I pushed them back. The meeting wasn't over yet. The board president banged his gavel. Everyone sit down, please. We're resuming. People went back to their seats. The board members returned to the front table. They looked serious. The board president cleared his throat. We're voting tonight on immediate policy changes. All staff will receive annual training on medical conditions and accommodations. We're also creating a direct reporting system. If building administrators dismiss medical concerns, parents can contact the district office directly. He looked at the other board members. All in favor. Every hand went up. The motion passes unanimously. Dr. Cross stood up. She looked shaken. Mrs. Susan will remain on administrative leave pending the investigation results. She paused. Principal Jeffries is also being placed on administrative leave. He failed to investigate and report serious medical concerns. Multiple complaints came to him over several years. He dismissed them all. The room erupted in whispers again. The board president banged his gavel. Dr. Cross sat down. Kirk Bailey stood up. The board president nodded at him. We're directing a full review of every complaint filed against Mrs. E. Susan during her 20-year career. We need to identify all potential victims. Understand the full scope of this problem. We'll have a complete report within 6 weeks. A board member in the middle raised her hand. I want to propose something. She stood up. We need a student advocacy position. Someone specifically responsible for making sure kids with medical conditions get proper help. Someone parents can go to directly. The board president looked at the other members. Discussion. Another board member spoke up. That's exactly what we need. Someone whose only job is protecting these kids, not someone juggling it with other responsibilities. A third board member nodded. We should have had this years ago. The board president called for a vote, all in favor of creating a student advocacy position. Every hand went up again. Motion passes. Dr. Cross, Develop a position description immediately. We want to start hiring within a month. The board president banged his gavel one more time. Meeting adjourned. People stood up and started gathering their things. I stayed in my seat for a moment. My legs felt shaky. Freya walked over and touched my shoulder. We should exchange numbers. All of us who spoke tonight. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. Mateo came over too. His wife was with him now. She had tears on her face. Kathy joined us and we stood in a small circle. Other parents approached. A woman whose name I didn't catch gave me her email. A man shook my hand and said his daughter had Mrs. Susan 3 years ago. We formed a group text right there in the meeting room. 10 parents total. Freya typed a message. We need to make sure they actually follow through on everything they promised tonight. Everyone agreed. She suggested meeting once a week. Someone offered their house. Another parent suggested the library. We settled on the library conference room. Thursdays at 7. I saved all the contact information in my phone. People started leaving. Dr. Cross was still talking to Kirk Bailey in the corner. They both looked serious. I walked out to the parking lot. The night air felt cold on my face. I got in my car and just sat there for a minute. My hands were still shaking. I started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot. The drive home took 20 minutes. My phone rang when I was halfway there. Adriana's name on the screen. I answered on speaker. How did it go? My voice cracked. They listened. They actually listened. I started crying. Had to pull over into a gas station parking lot. Adriana stayed on the phone while I sobbed. It's over. Caleb doesn't have to go back to her classroom. She's on leave. They're investigating everything. Adriana was crying too. I could hear it in her voice. I'm so proud of you. You didn't give up. I wiped my eyes, took some deep breaths, started driving again. Got home 10 minutes later. The house was dark. My mom had put Caleb to bed hours ago. I thanked her, told her it went well. She hugged me and left. I went upstairs, checked on Caleb. He was sleeping peacefully. His face relaxed. I stood in his doorway and watched him breathe. My phone buzzed. Text from Freya. Thank you for being brave enough to go first tonight. I couldn't have done it without your example, I texted back. We all helped each other. That's what mattered. The next morning, my alarm went off at 6. I felt exhausted but also lighter somehow. Made coffee, checked my phone. 3 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. 2 voicemails. The first one was a reporter from the local newspaper. The second was from a different reporter. Both wanted interviews about last night's meeting. I deleted the voicemails. Caleb came downstairs in his pajamas. Morning, Mom. I made him breakfast. Told him he was staying home from the school today. He looked worried. Am I in trouble? No, baby. The grown-ups are still working things out. You're safe. He ate his cereal. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and opened the newspaper website on my phone. The headline made my stomach drop. School board addresses medical dismissal pattern at Lincoln Elementary. The article was long, detailed. It named Mrs. Susan, named Principal Jeffries, quoted several parents from the meeting, quoted me. My phone rang again. Another unknown number. I didn't answer. It rang 4 more times that morning. I turned off the ringer. Caleb played with his toys in the living room. I did laundry, tried to keep busy. My phone buzzed with a text around noon. Unknown number. This is Dr. Cross. Do you have a few minutes to talk? I called her back. She answered on the first ring. I owe you an apology. When you came to my office last week, I didn't take your concerns seriously enough. I should have investigated immediately. Her voice sounded different from at the meeting. Quieter, almost shaky. I'm reviewing our policies now, trying to figure out how this went on for so long, how many families we failed. I didn't know what to say. Thank you for calling. She asked if I would be willing to meet with her next week, help identify gaps in the system. I agreed. We set a time for Tuesday afternoon. Kirk Bailey called that evening. I hope you don't mind. Dr. Cross gave me your number. I've started going through Mrs. Susan's personnel file, looking at every complaint ever filed. I'm finding a pattern that goes back 15 years. He paused. So far, I've identified 17 families. 17. The word hit me hard. Some of them pulled their kids out of the district. Others just requested classroom changes. But nobody pursued formal complaints. They all felt like the system would protect the teacher over their child. I sat down on the couch. Caleb was upstairs playing video games. What happens now? Kirk explained the investigation process. Interviews with families, review of documentation, legal analysis. It would take several weeks, maybe longer. But he sounded determined. This can't happen again. We're going to make sure of that. I thanked him, hung up, stared at my phone. 17 families. How many kids? How much harm? The district sent a letter home with every student at Lincoln Elementary on Friday. I got a copy in the mail on Saturday. It explained the situation in careful legal language, acknowledged complaints about medical accommodation failures, invited families with concerns to contact the new Student Advocacy Office. The office didn't exist yet, but they were creating it. I read the letter 3 times. It felt surreal. 2 weeks ago, nobody would listen. Now the whole district was forced to pay attention. My phone buzzed. Text from Freya. "Did you get the letter?" I replied yes. She wrote back. 3 more families from our school already contacted me. They had problems with Mrs. Susan too. Nobody knew we could complain. The group text lit up. Other parents sharing similar stories. Kids with medical conditions dismissed. Parents told they were overreacting. The pattern was bigger than any of us realized. Monday morning, I took Caleb to see Khalil Pratt, his regular neurologist appointment. Dr. Pratt examined him, asked questions about his seizures. Caleb told him about the last one at the school, the cafeteria monitor calling the ambulance, Mrs. Susan saying he was faking. Dr. Pratt's face got tight. He wrote a prescription, new medication, started Caleb on a low dose. We'll increase it gradually, monitor how he responds. He handed me paperwork, seizure action plan, instructions for the school, what to do if Caleb has an episode, how to keep him safe. I took it all, asked questions, took notes. Dr. Pratt scheduled a follow-up in 2 weeks. We left with the prescription and the action plan, stopped at the pharmacy, got the medication, started it that night. The substitute teacher called on Tuesday. My name is Rachel. I'm covering Mrs. Susan's class. I wanted to reach out about Caleb. I understand he has epilepsy. I want to make sure I know how to help him if he has a seizure at the school. Relief flooded through me. A teacher who actually cared, who wanted to learn. I explained Caleb's condition, described what his seizures looked like, sent her the action plan Dr. Pratt had given me. She asked good questions, took notes, said she'd share everything with the nurse and the other staff who work with Caleb. Thank you for taking this seriously. She was quiet for a moment. Every child deserves to feel safe at the school. I should have been teaching that class from the beginning. Wednesday afternoon, I went to the school, met with Rachel, with Caleb's care team. The school nurse Trudy was there. So was the special education coordinator, the counselor. We sat around a table in the conference room, went through the seizure action plan line by line, what triggers to watch for, what to do during an episode, when to call for help, how to support Caleb afterward. Trudy took detailed notes. She looked relieved. Finally, someone is listening. She'd been trying to get Mrs. Susan to take Caleb's seizures seriously for weeks. Nobody would back her up. Now we had a plan, written down, signed by everyone, copies for every adult who worked with Caleb. Rachel promised to review it with the whole class. Age-appropriate explanation, so the other kids would understand and not be scared if Caleb had a seizure. Adriana came over for dinner on Friday, brought Caleb a new video game, something with dinosaurs. He was excited, hugged her, ran upstairs to play it. Adriana and I sat in the kitchen. She poured us both wine. I'm proud of you. You fought for him. You didn't give up even when everyone tried to shut you down. I took a sip. It felt good to hear. The past few weeks had been exhausting, scary, but worth it. Caleb was safe now, getting proper treatment. Had teachers who would protect him instead of punish him? That's what mattered. Adriana raised her glass, to not giving up. We clinked glasses. Caleb called down from upstairs. Mom, come see this level. I smiled, went upstairs to watch him play. 3 weeks passed. The district worked through procedures, legal reviews, policy discussions. I checked my email every morning, waited for updates. Finally, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. Email from the district office. Kirk Bailey had finished his investigation. The report was available for review. I called the district, asked if I could come read it. The secretary said yes, scheduled me for Thursday morning. I took time off work, drove to the district office building, signed in at the front desk, waited in the lobby. Kirk Bailey came out to meet me, brought me to a conference room. The report sat on the table, thick stack of papers, bound with black clips. He pulled out a chair for me, sat across the table. The findings were extensive. 20 separate complaints against Mrs. Susan over 15 years. Parents reporting dismissed medical conditions. Kids punished for symptoms they couldn't control. Asthma attacks called fake. Diabetic episodes ignored. Severe allergies treated as attention-seeking. The pattern was clear, documented, undeniable. Each complaint included dates, parent statements, medical documentation. Some families had pulled their kids from the district. Others switched classrooms. A few just gave up fighting. Nobody thought the system would listen. Kirk Bailey pointed to specific sections, highlighted passages. His voice stayed level, professional, but I could see the tension in his jaw. This should have been stopped years ago. The second part hit harder. Principal Jeffries had received at least 8 formal complaints about Mrs. Susan. Written complaints, submitted through proper channels, requesting investigations. He never forwarded them to the district office, never escalated the concerns. Instead, he wrote internal notes, called parents overprotective, labeled them difficult, characterized their legitimate medical concerns as helicopter parenting. His documentation showed a clear pattern of protecting Mrs. and Susan, dismissing worried parents, blocking accountability. I read through complaint after complaint, each one serious, each one ignored. My hands started shaking. How many kids suffered because he wouldn't listen? Kirk Bailey closed the folder. The board meets again next Monday. This evidence changes everything. I drove home, called Freya, told her about the report. She went quiet for a long moment. 20 families, 20 kids who needed help and got punished instead. The weekend dragged. I couldn't stop thinking about those other families. Other kids who went through what Caleb experienced. Some for years longer. Monday evening came. I arrived at the board meeting early. Took my seat in the front row. The room filled quickly. Parents, teachers, community members. Everyone had heard about the investigation results. The board president called the meeting to order. Kirk Bailey presented his findings, showed the documentation, explained the pattern. The board members looked shaken. One kept shaking her head. Another took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes. The board went into closed session, discussed personnel matters. We waited in the hallway. 40 minutes passed. They came back out, called the meeting to order again. The board president read from prepared notes, based on the investigation findings. Evidence of repeated violations. Failure to provide appropriate medical accommodations. The board votes to terminate Mrs. Susan's employment for cause, effective immediately. The room stayed silent. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. I sat still, felt relief wash over me. It was done. The board president continued. Principal Jeffries is also terminated. His failure to investigate complaints. His negligence in reporting serious concerns. His pattern of dismissing legitimate parent worries. The board acknowledges his actions allowed harmful behavior to continue for years. More information would follow. Personnel files would be reviewed. Procedures would be updated. Dr. Cross stood up, addressed the room directly. Her voice cracked slightly. The district failed these families. We failed these children. Starting immediately, we're offering counseling services. Any student harmed by Mrs. Susan's treatment. The district will pay, no questions asked. She paused, looked around the room. I'm also committing personally. Any accommodation request denied by building administrators. It comes to my desk. I review it myself. Nobody gets dismissed again. The meeting ended. Parents gathered in small groups, talking quietly, sharing relief, some crying. I stood up, felt exhausted. Freya found me in the lobby. Mateo was with her. Kathy joined us. We should meet. Keep monitoring this. Make sure they follow through. I agreed. Gave them my address. They could come to my house. We'd figure out next steps together. Thursday evening, they all arrived. Sat around my kitchen table. We talked about what happened, what needed to change, how to help other families. We decided to form an official group, Parent Advocates, resource for families navigating medical accommodations, monitor the district's policy implementation, hold them accountable. Freya volunteered to handle communications. Mateo would track policy changes. Kathy offered to create resource guides. I would serve as primary contact with the district. We had our first real meeting, our first real purpose. Friday morning, I took Caleb back to Khalil Pratt. Regular follow-up appointment. Dr. Pratt examined him carefully, asked detailed questions, ran through his medication checklist. The seizures are well controlled, no episodes in 3 weeks. His brain scans look good, no signs of damage. I felt my chest loosen. No damage. We caught it in time. Dr. Pratt continued. Earlier diagnosis would have been better, but you acted when you realized something was wrong. You pushed until someone listened. That saved him from serious complications. I thanked him, scheduled the next appointment, left with renewed medication prescriptions. That afternoon my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. This is the new principal at Lincoln Elementary. My name is Dr. Gomez. I wanted to introduce myself, explain my background, ask how I can support Caleb. I sat down, listened. She had worked in special education for 12 years, managed accommodation plans for students with disabilities, understood medical needs, wanted to review Caleb's seizure action plan personally, make sure every teacher knew the protocol, train the cafeteria staff, update the nurse. I agreed to meet her. Tuesday after school, went to Lincoln Elementary, met Dr. Gomez in her office. She was younger than I expected. Warm smile, genuine eye contact, actually listened when I talked. We went through Caleb's needs, his triggers, his medication schedule, what to watch for, how to respond. She took detailed notes, asked smart questions, already knew medical terminology, understood seizure protocols. She'd already reviewed his action plan with every teacher, shared it with cafeteria staff, met with Trudy Horn twice. I'm cautiously hopeful. She seemed different, actually cared, actually understood. Before I left, my phone buzzed. Email from the local parent-teacher organization. They wanted me to speak at their next meeting, share my experience, help other parents understand their rights, talk about advocating for kids with medical needs. I stared at the email. Public speaking terrified me. Standing in front of strangers, sharing personal details, being vulnerable. But I thought about those 20 families, kids who suffered because parents didn't know they could push back, didn't realize they had rights. I replied yes. I'd speak at their meeting. The meeting room felt packed. Maybe 40 people showed up, parents mostly, a few teachers I didn't know. I sat near the front with my folder of notes. My hands shook a little when they called my name. I walked to the microphone, took a breath, started talking about Caleb's seizures, how Mrs. Susan punished him instead of helping him, how she told paramedics not to treat my son. My voice stayed steady even though my stomach felt tight. I showed them the neurologist's report, explained about temporal lobe epilepsy, how untreated seizures can damage a kid's brain. Several parents nodded. One woman in the third row wiped her eyes. When I finished, people clapped, not loud or long, just enough to show they heard me. Afterward, 2 moms came over. The first one had a daughter with diabetes. Her teacher kept saying she was faking low blood sugar to get out of tests. Made her sit through gym class even when she felt dizzy. The second mom's son had asthma. His teacher thought he used his inhaler for attention. Told him to toughen up during recess. I gave them both my phone number. Told them about our advocacy group, how Freya and Mateo and Kathy were helping families push back against teachers who dismissed medical problems. They both looked relieved, like they'd been carrying something heavy and finally found someone to help them hold it. A few weeks later, the district finished their staff training. All the teachers had to learn about medical conditions, how to spot seizures, what ADHD actually looks like, how to handle diabetes and asthma and anxiety. Trudy called me one evening. She sounded tired but happy. The training was really good. They brought in doctors and nurses, showed videos of real medical episodes, made teachers practice emergency responses. I think people finally get it. They understand these are real health problems, not kids being difficult. I thanked her, asked if she thought things would actually change. She paused, then said yes. She really believed it would make a difference. Caleb went back to the school the next Monday, full-time. No more staying home because I was scared. His seizure plan was printed and posted in his classroom, in the nurse's office, in the cafeteria. Every adult who worked with him knew exactly what to watch for, what to do if he had an episode. He bounced out of the car that morning and ran toward the building where his friends were waiting. I watched him high-five 2 boys near the door. Saw him laugh at something one of them said. The substitute teacher sent me an email that afternoon. Caleb participated in every activity today, answered questions, worked well with his group, no medical issues at all. He seems really happy to be back. I read it 3 times, felt my shoulders drop. He was safe. He was learning. He was just being a regular kid again. 4 months after everything started, I got a letter in the mail. District letterhead. But the return address was an insurance company. I opened it carefully, read it twice to make sure I understood. They were thanking me, saying my documentation and quick action prevented a serious injury, maybe even saved a child's life. They explained that if Caleb had suffered brain damage from untreated seizures while under the school's care, the district would have faced massive lawsuits. Their insurance rates would have gone up. Maybe they would have lost coverage completely. My records of every incident, every call, every dismissal. That paperwork proved the district needed to change their policies before something terrible happened. The letter ended with a line that stuck with me. Your advocacy protected not just your son, but potentially dozens of other children. I folded it carefully, put it in my documentation folder, proof that speaking up mattered. Kirk called me a week later. His voice sounded serious. The state education board suspended Mrs. Susan's teaching license. She couldn't teach anywhere while they did their own investigation. I asked if that was normal. He said no. Usually the state waits for the district to finish everything first. But this case was different. The pattern was so clear. So many kids harmed over so many years. They felt they had to act fast. Make sure she couldn't hurt anyone else while they looked into everything. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt relieved. Part of me felt sad that it took this long. That so many families had to suffer before anyone stopped her. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. Unknown number again. I almost didn't answer. A woman's voice introduced herself. She'd just been hired for the new student advocacy position. Used to be a special education teacher. Had a daughter with cerebral palsy. Spent years fighting for proper accommodations. She understood what families went through. Wanted to make the system better. She asked if I'd join an advisory committee. Help create policies that actually worked. I said yes immediately. The first committee meeting happened 2 weeks later. 6 parents, 3 district staff members. The new advocate led the discussion. We talked about how to report problems without being scared of punishment. How to make sure complaints actually got investigated. How to track whether schools followed through on accommodation plans. I shared my experience. How Mr. Jeffries dismissed my concerns. how I had to go all the way to the superintendent before anyone listened. Other parents nodded. They'd hit the same walls. The advocate took pages of notes, promised to turn our ideas into real procedures. Ones that protected families instead of protecting bad teachers. Caleb's teacher sent home a progress report in his backpack. I opened it while making dinner. He'd caught up on everything he missed. Reading at grade level. Math scores were good. Science project got an A. The teacher wrote a note at the bottom. Caleb is thriving now that he has proper medical care and support. He's engaged in class, works well with others. His seizures are well controlled and he knows how to advocate for himself if he needs help. I showed Adriana when she came over. She hugged me, told me I did good, really good. Our parent advocacy group kept growing. Started with 4 of us around my kitchen table. Now we had 12 families. We met at the library once a month, shared information about new policies, talked about challenges we were facing, helped each other figure out how to get schools to follow accommodation plans. Freya brought snacks. Mateo made copies of useful documents. Kathy created a resource guide about different medical conditions, what teachers needed to know, what parents should ask for. We handed them out to anyone who needed them. Dr. Cross sent an email to all parents in the district. New policy starting immediately. Anytime a building principal denied a medical accommodation request, they had to forward it to her office within 1 day. She would review it personally, make the final decision. No more complaints getting buried at the school level. She also set up quarterly reviews. Every school had to report on how they were handling accommodation plans, whether kids were getting what they needed, if problems came up. The email ended with her direct phone number. Call me if your child's medical needs aren't being met. I will handle it. I printed it out, added it to my documentation folder. Things were really changing. I grabbed milk and bread at the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon when someone called my name from the produce section. Trudy Horn stood by the lettuce with her cart half full. She smiled and walked over to me. I wanted to thank you for what you did. The culture at Lincoln Elementary has completely changed since everything happened with Mrs. and Susan. Teachers come to me now when they're unsure about something instead of just dismissing it. Last week, a teacher asked me about a kid who seemed dizzy during gym class. 6 months ago, she would have told him to stop complaining and get back to running laps. Now she actually wants to understand what might be wrong. I felt relieved hearing that. Trudy squeezed my arm before heading toward the checkout. The whole drive home, I thought about how different things were now. How many kids were safer because people finally started listening. 3 days later, I took Caleb to his regular appointment with Khalil. The doctor reviewed his seizure log and checked his medication levels. He'd gone 4 months without a single episode. Khalil pulled up Caleb's brain scans on the computer and compared them to the ones from 6 months ago. The improvement is remarkable. His seizures are so well controlled that I'm comfortable reducing his medication dosage. We'll cut it by 20% and monitor him closely. If he stays stable, we might be able to get him on even less medication eventually. Some patients with temporal lobe epilepsy manage very well on minimal doses once we find the right treatment approach. Caleb grinned when Khalil told him the good news. He'd been worried about taking medicine every day for the rest of his life. The doctor explained that his brain was responding beautifully to treatment, and his prognosis was excellent. I scheduled his next appointment for 3 months out instead of the usual 6 weeks. Progress. The envelope arrived from the State Education Board 2 weeks later. I opened it standing in my kitchen. The investigation report was 30 pages long. I skipped to the conclusion section. The board had permanently revoked Mrs. Susan's teaching license. They cited her pattern of medical dismissal spanning 15 years. The report documented harm to multiple students and noted that her behavior showed no indication she understood the severity of her actions. She would never teach in any public or private school in the state again. I set the letter on the counter and stared at it. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sad that it took so long for anyone to stop her. I called Kirk Bailey to let him know. He'd been waiting for the state's decision. This is the right outcome. She can't hurt any more kids. I agreed with him even though the whole situation still made me angry. Kirk called me back the next afternoon with more news. Principal Jeffries had accepted a settlement from the district rather than fighting his termination. The settlement included a clause that prevented him from working in education administration anywhere in the state. Kirk explained that this was better than a drawn-out legal battle that might have let Jeffries find work in another district. He won't be able to go to another school and do the same thing. This way, there's a permanent record of why he was terminated, and he can't just move to a different county and start over. I thanked Kirk for keeping me updated. He'd been helpful throughout the entire process, even though I knew dealing with this situation had been complicated for the district. Accountability mattered. Both Mrs. Susan and Mr. Jeffries had failed the kids in their care, and now they faced real consequences for those failures. Our parent advocacy group met at the library on a Thursday night. 12 families showed up. We'd been working on a proposal to present to the school board about hiring requirements for administrative positions. Mrs. and Freya had drafted language requiring medical accommodation expertise as part of the job qualifications. Mateo added sections about mandatory training and ongoing education. Kathy researched what other districts were doing successfully. We polished the proposal until it felt solid. The school board meeting was scheduled for the following week. I volunteered to present our recommendations. We divided up the other speaking slots so that multiple parents could share why these changes mattered. Freya would talk about ADHD accommodations. Mateo would discuss learning disabilities. Kathy would address mental health concerns. We practiced our presentations and gave each other feedback. By the time we left the library, I felt confident we had a strong case. The board had been receptive to parent input since everything happened with Mrs. Susan. They knew they needed to rebuild trust with families. The school board approved our proposal unanimously at their next meeting. Dr. Cross announced that all future administrative job postings would include medical accommodation expertise as a required qualification. The board also mandated annual training for all administrators on recognizing and supporting students with various medical conditions. They updated the hiring process to include questions about how candidates would handle different accommodation scenarios. I watched the board members vote one by one. Each yes felt like another layer of protection for kids who needed medical support at the school. After the meeting ended, 3 board members came over to thank us for the proposal. One told me that our advocacy work had helped the district avoid similar problems in the future. They were taking parent concerns seriously now, instead of dismissing them. That night, I went home feeling like the system was actually changing instead of just claiming it would. An email arrived in my inbox 2 days later from someone named Dr. Jasmine Morgan. She introduced herself as the coordinator of a statewide coalition working on student medical rights in schools. She'd heard about what happened in our district, and the policy changes we'd successfully advocated for. She invited me to join their coalition as a parent representative. The group met quarterly and worked on legislation to protect students with medical conditions across the entire state. I read through the coalition's website and saw they'd been instrumental in passing several important laws. Their current project focused on creating standardized protocols for medical emergencies in schools. I replied to Dr. Morgan and agreed to join. The work felt meaningful. If I could help create systemic change that protected kids beyond just our district, then everything we'd been through with Caleb would serve a larger purpose. Maybe other families wouldn't have to fight as hard as we did. Caleb came home from the school on a Friday afternoon and found me making dinner. He dropped his backpack by the door and climbed onto a kitchen stool. "Mom, I think I want to be a doctor when I grow up." I asked him what made him think about that. He explained that his class had been learning about different careers, and when the teacher asked what he might want to do, being a doctor felt right. I want to help other kids who have seizures like me, so they don't have to be scared, and so people understand what's really happening. His teacher had sent home a note that week mentioning how Caleb had been sharing information about epilepsy with his classmates. He'd explained what seizures were and what to do if someone had one. Several kids had asked him questions and he'd answered them confidently. The teacher wrote that Caleb was helping reduce the stigma around medical conditions in their classroom. I hugged him and told him he'd make an excellent doctor. He already understood what it felt like to need medical help and to have people not believe you. That empathy would make him good at taking care of patients. The district received a state award 3 months later for their improved medical accommodation policies and practices. Dr. Cross invited our parent advocacy group to the ceremony. We sat in the front row while she accepted the award on behalf of the district. During her speech, she credited the parent advocacy group for driving the changes. She specifically mentioned how parent voices had transformed the way the district approached medical accommodations. She talked about the failures that had occurred and how the district had committed to doing better. She named me directly and thanked me for refusing to accept dismissive responses when my son needed help. The audience applauded. Several other districts had sent representatives to learn about our policies. Dr. Cross handed out copies of our accommodation protocols and offered to share resources. After the ceremony, parents from other districts approached me asking how we'd organized our advocacy group. I exchanged contact information with 4 different families who wanted to start similar groups in their areas. Adriana picked up Caleb on a Saturday morning to take him to a science museum exhibit about the brain and neurology. They spent 3 hours looking at displays and interactive demonstrations. When they got back to my house, Caleb ran inside talking nonstop about everything he'd learned. They had this huge model of a brain and you could see all the different parts. Adriana helped me find the temporal lobe where my seizures come from. There was a video showing how electrical signals work and why sometimes they get mixed up and cause seizures. I understand my condition so much better now. He showed me a booklet the museum had given him with information about different neurological conditions. He'd already read through half of it. Adriana smiled at me over his head. She'd taken photos of him at the exhibits looking excited and engaged. He's proud of understanding what's happening in his own brain instead of being scared of it. That's huge. I agreed with her. Knowledge replaced fear. Caleb wasn't just a kid with epilepsy anymore. He was a kid who understood epilepsy and could explain it to others. The parent-teacher conference happened on a Tuesday evening exactly 1 year after Mrs. Susan first called me about Caleb's seizures. His current teacher asked me to sit down at the small table in her classroom. She pulled out Caleb's progress reports and work samples. "I want you to know that Caleb is doing exceptionally well. His seizures are managed and he never hesitates to tell me if he needs help. He's confident in class and participates actively in discussions. His reading and math scores are above grade level. But what really stands out is how he's become a leader in creating an inclusive classroom environment. When another student was diagnosed with diabetes last month, Caleb was the first one to welcome him and explain that having a medical condition doesn't make you different in a bad way. He's teaching the other kids empathy and acceptance just by being himself. I felt tears starting but blinked them back. A year ago, my son was punished for having seizures. Now he was thriving and helping other kids feel accepted. The teacher showed me a drawing Caleb had made showing different kids with different needs all working together. He'd written across the top that everyone deserves help when they need it. I thanked the teacher for supporting him and left the conference feeling grateful that we'd fought hard enough to change things. Caleb was safe now, and so were all the other kids who came after him. The parent advocacy group met at Freya's house on a Saturday afternoon exactly 1 year after that first school board meeting. 12 families crowded into her living room and kitchen, bringing food and stories about kids who were doing better now. We set up tables with pasta salad and sandwiches and cookies that someone's daughter had decorated. Freya stood up and tapped her glass to get everyone's attention. She talked about how we'd helped 23 families navigate medical accommodation requests this year. She mentioned 3 situations where parents came to us early, and we helped them document everything properly, so things never escalated like mine did. Everyone clapped, and I felt proud that something good had come from all that fighting. We spent the afternoon sharing updates about our kids and discussing how the new district policies were working. Some schools were following the rules better than others, but at least now parents knew they could report problems directly to the district office without going through building administrators first. 2 days later, I found a card in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note from a family Kirk Bailey had identified during his investigation. They explained that their daughter had been in Mrs. and Susan's class 4 years ago, and the teacher had dismissed her migraines as attention-seeking behavior. They'd pulled her from Lincoln Elementary and enrolled her somewhere else rather than fight the system. Reading about what happened to Caleb and seeing justice for other families helped them process their own experience. They said they were grateful someone finally held the system accountable, even though it came too late for their daughter. I saved the card in the folder with all my documentation from Caleb's case. Their words reminded me why speaking up mattered even when it felt impossible. Caleb had his annual checkup with the neurologist on a Thursday morning. I took him out of school and we sat in the waiting room looking at the fish tank until they called his name. The doctor did all the standard tests and then pulled up his brain scans on the computer screen. She pointed to different areas and explained what she was looking at. The scans showed no damage from the months his seizures went untreated. His brain development was right on track for his age, and his seizure control remained excellent on the current medication dosage. She told us the early intervention after diagnosis made all the difference. If he'd gone longer without treatment, the outcome might have been very different. I thanked her and scheduled our next appointment for 6 months out. Caleb asked if he could stop taking medicine someday, and she said maybe when he was older. But for now, the medication was keeping him healthy and safe. Friday afternoon, I stood outside the chain-link fence surrounding Lincoln Elementary's playground and watched Caleb play soccer with his classmates during recess. He ran after the ball with confidence, laughing when he scored a goal. His friends high-fived him, and nobody treated him differently because he had epilepsy. The substitute who'd replaced Mrs. and Susan stood nearby watching all the kids carefully. She knew Caleb's seizure action plan, and she'd never once suggested his medical condition was fake or attention-seeking. I watched him play for 10 more minutes before heading back to my car. The fight had been exhausting, and I wished I'd never had to wage it. But standing there watching my healthy, safe, thriving son, I felt proud that speaking up protected not just Caleb, but dozens of other children who deserved better from the adults responsible for their care.